Music Cities podcast is here to talk about the convergence of music and economic development. But this isn't a traditional how to do music in your community just as an economic development tool type conversation. This is not about doing festivals and music events and those types of normal run-of-the-mill everyday activities. This is about finding those hidden economic development stories in music, but that aren't quite so obvious. That's here what we're looking for. And so what we're talking about today is Babymetal. We're calling this the Babymetal Innovation Framework. We posted about this in our blog a while back, but this is the Babymetal Innovation Framework is how three schoolgirls rewrote the rules of market creation. And it's an incredible story, and I witnessed this on July 20th when I traveled to Las Vegas to go to a Babymetal show. I'd started listening to them recently, but it was really at the show that I realized this really is, as we talked about in episode 2, this is a tribe. They call it the Babymetalverse. And it's this connection that just everybody has to this concept. And obviously you've got leadership from the band and the creators and the musicians and everybody involved, but everybody's a part of it and everybody feels like they have a role in it, in this tribe, and everybody's connected to each other through it. And so here, I'm Kevin Crowder. You know that we've been building towards this episode. This is one I've been looking forward to doing for a long time. You know, we talked about creating for ourselves, and that's what this podcast is. We talked about the power of music tribes. We talked about how Jimmy Buffett created the ultimate place brand with Margaritaville. So now let's do a deep dive into what might be the most important business lesson of the decade so far, disguised as a Japanese metal band. So to give you a sense of what that looked like at the time, because it's been 15 years, you've got to understand a little bit of the context of, you know, these girls growing up and they themselves and the band and the whole community, the whole tribe evolving over a 15-year period. So what you have there is something that the music industry experts called a gimmick. The metal purists were absolutely outraged. Pop fans were confused. There was no category for what Babymetal was doing. You had brutal heavy metal, some incredible musicians. As a musician, these guys are just phenomenal to watch. And I want to be a guitarist in this band. And watching lots of their videos, focused on watching the guitarists and the drummers and really wanting to be part of this tribe. You know, and it combined that brutal metal with J-pop, Japanese pop. And so there was not a category for this. But where are we today? They've sold millions of albums. Metal Fourth just came out. It arrived today in the office. It came out last Friday. You know, one of their prior albums hit number 13 on the Billboard 200. They've headlined major metal festivals around the world. They created this genre that they essentially own to themselves. And they've built this global fan base, the Babymetalers. So they didn't succeed just despite the criticism. What they did is they proved that authentic innovation always looks impossible until it becomes inevitable. I mean, we didn't know we needed Babymetal in the metal realm until we had it. And then it just made sense. So as I mentioned, I experienced this firsthand in Las Vegas a few weeks ago. Thousands of fans, teenage girls to grizzled metalheads in their 60s. Everyone singing along to this kawaii metal, what they call it. And I realized I was witnessing something. It was something every economic developer, every entrepreneur, innovators need to understand. I was just watching it. And it was just a masterclass in how to create a market where one doesn't exist. You know, we talk about in economic development, the things that somebody needs to know when they're coming to your community and they want to open a business, they want to do a startup, they want to do an endeavor. They need to know how soon are you, the regulatory agencies, the city, the bureaucracy, going to get out of their way and let them get open? Is there a place that's affordable and available and appropriate for what they want to do? Real estate. And then, is there a market that they can serve? Or can they create one? As I said, here we had a masterclass. And that's it. Most businesses come into their community and they're going to try to see, is there an existing market that I can serve? And they're going to come in to compete. They're going to fight for 0.1% of a category that someone else has already dominated. But what Babymetal do? Far more powerful. It's rare, but when that lightning strikes, it's amazing. They created an entirely new category where they essentially own 100% of the market share. And I thought about it, it just connects to what we taught at Florida Main Street back in May. And with the book that I wrote, not inventing a concept, but just maybe reframing it a little bit, but it's what I wrote about in Unleash Your Unfair Advantage. They unleashed the ultimate unfair advantage by, they're absolutely impossible to replicate. You can't authentically do what they do. They are an ultimate purple cow, if you're familiar with Seth Godin's term from that marketing concept. So there's a paradox when it comes to innovation. And what Babymetal demonstrates is that if everyone understands your idea, if you go and tell people what you're going to do and they get it, it's probably not true innovation. Differentiation encounters resistance, not understanding. It doesn't fit the mental models that people have. We encounter this at Business Flare with the approach we take to consulting. When I'm talking to other consultants, I get this resistance or lack of understanding in some decisions that we make. That can even sometimes happen in your team. You have to work really hard internally when it comes to fostering that innovation and really collectively, bringing your team or your tribe along with the innovation. So when Babymetal came forward, what did they face? Metal fans are not going to accept J-pop elements, cutesy little girls dancing around, teenagers, dancing, choreographed dancing itself. Pop fans are not going to, and J-pop fans, they're not going to embrace heavy music. It's just too brutal. And boy, I'll tell you, it is brutal. I mean, just listening to them on Spotify, but you should hear them in concert. The international markets are not going to understand Japanese culture. I remember as a budding metalhead, trying to, learning guitar and growing up as a teen in the 80s. I remember during those hair metal days, and there was a heavy metal band from Japan called Loudness, but they didn't really make far. They themselves were seen as a gimmick, and they didn't even have the gimmicks of the J-pop and the cutesy girls and all of that. They were a gimmick because, hair metal, Sunset Strip, right there on the wall. The whole thing was a gimmick. But that was another piece of resistance. International markets are not going to understand Japanese culture. And they're singing in Japanese. How is this going to work? And then the combination of this, it's too niche. You can't scale this. So if you think about that, these are all things that any entrepreneur, any innovator might face. That the core audience of what it's based on, metal fans won't accept J-pop elements. Well, the established industry is not going to accept, and they're going to fight and resist this innovative change. They like the status quo because they dominate. Pop fans want to embrace heavy music. The customer, it's putting yourself into the mind of the customer rather than listening to what the customer is looking for. International markets won't understand Japanese culture. Well, that again is making assumptions about a market that you can't make. It's the market that will make that decision. And if you produce something of quality and something authentic, remember what we talked about with the Rick Rubin comment, just create authentically and people will get it or they won't. And then the combination is too niche to scale. Well, that's where your vision and your dedication and sticking to it and being unapologetic about it, which we'll talk about later, becomes important. So every one of those objectives was proved wrong. And what's the biggest thing that's going to separate the successful innovators from the ones who fail? The ones that succeed don't apologize, they stick to it, and they keep going through all of the criticism, not paying attention to it. not paying attention to it. I heard somebody say, or I saw a post on LinkedIn, I think about this with some of the things we do. I think about this even in our approach to providing our advisory services to cities. And I hear from other consultants different types of comments. Either our approach is wrong or our fee structure is wrong or different things. And I saw someone said that, if the person giving you advice, even if you didn't ask for it, has not built what you're trying to build, their advice is meaningless. Their advice is worthless. It doesn't have anything to do with what you're doing. You know where you want to go. Have the will to get there. The same thing with cities. Some cities are innovative. Some cities do amazing, creative things. But most of them get trapped in listening to the best practices that they hear at a municipal league conference or a city manager conference. And they play it safe. They can't make it through the criticism phase, and they're going to derail an entire city's economic development path, an innovation path, because of 3 to 5 voices that criticize at a commission meeting. So, as someone who spent years in metal bands trying to make it in the music industry, and I never did, I've had a good time. I played some festivals, recorded an album and a half. Talent alone is not enough. This is another good lesson for cities. It's not just talent. It's not just demographics. It's not just the market. The music business is brutal. So can be economic development. There are incredibly talented musicians, some who are more skilled than anyone that you see at the top level of success, but they didn't have that combination of not only talent, but the work ethic and the will and the right element of timing and luck that you got to have to break through. These girls did. So Babymetal they didn't have to just overcome the normal obstacles in an industry that very talented musicians have to overcome. Now, being Japanese, I think that there's probably a greater work ethic to this and dedication to the craft. Not that American musicians aren't, but when we start thinking about what this is in that J-pop element, I don't see something like this, which has to be more authentic than regular pop music here in the U.S. I think it could have only been a Japanese endeavor. But beyond those normal industry challenges, they had to create this entire new category. There is no pathway to what to do this. And so this is a work ethic that's just crazy. And we tell our cities, you've got to have the will to do what you need to do. And at the end of the day, it rests with the band. The 5 to 7 that sit up on the dais have to have that work ethic, have to have that will. They had to go from this gimmicky, weird experiment to a global phenomenon with all of this criticism and resistance all the way through. And there's an incredible lesson there for entrepreneurs and for startups. There's also a fantastic lesson there for all of you cities who are out there, especially you policymakers who just get tempted to give up. Businesses give up. When that inevitable resistance arrives, cash flow, whatever it is, market absorption, many businesses give up and they take the safe path. They're just going to come back to whatever's going to be safe and conventional and just get those types of results. These girls stayed true to their vision when it could have been much easier to go more metal or more pop to appease their critics. As an example of that, I want to show you from last year. So you saw a little clip earlier of them when they were young, 10, 12 years ago. As they have evolved, as they've grown up, they've really come into their own in the presence that they bring to the stage, the way they manage an audience. And I'm going to show you an example of that because it's just it shows not only the tribal concept, but it's a great demonstration of leadership and teamwork. But we'll get to that in a minute. But what I want to first get to is show you how they stuck it out. Because one of their first songs was this song called Gimme Chocolate. And it was real cutesy, and they had this it wasn't just a choreographed dance. What I found in my personal taste in liking them is as I've watched their later evolution into just really metal queens. And they're in their 20s now. They're solid performers. They've toured the world. They've headlined festivals. They are as seasoned now as any heavy metal musician out there, and you see it. And some of their choreographed dance have taken on maybe more intensity. I see more relation to martial arts in those dances, or into samurai or Japanese culture. But there's some, like Gimme Chocolate, that was really cutesy, and it was these cute little girls in tutus and dancing around with this brutal music going, singing about eating chocolate. What you'll see in the video that I'm going to show you is that they did not compromise on that. They still do the same exact dance that they did when they were little girls, teens, maybe preteens even, when the song first came out. And I think that's important. And you'll see them, and you'll see in here how much fun they're having, but you'll also see that sticking to that and building that credibility and building that fan base, that tribe, those customers that buy your product, you'll see how they embrace it. Watch the crowd when they're up there laughing and dancing and doing this sort of cutesy little dance. So there you see it. You see they didn't compromise. They still do what they do, and it just comes, and it's just embraced. And so they're authentic, they're real, they're grown up, they just connect with their audience and their tribe in an incredible way. So yeah, they could have gone more metal, and they have gotten heavier. In the new album, they do a lot more collaborations, but it is a good mix. So what this does is it connects to what I see in economic development. You have cities, and they have their unfair advantage. They have these unique cultural or geographic or historical assets. And then they may abandon their authentic strategies, as soon as critics get too loud. They revert to copying other places' best practices. Here's what we heard at the conference. Let's do that, instead of capitalizing on what makes you irreplaceably different. So then we think about, how's our framework, the business framework, come into play with Babymetal? And this is what everything we do is based on. It goes back to my time in Miami Beach and looking at how the organic revitalization of South Beach happened, driven by entrepreneurs and placemakers. And we frame that through the lens of 5 opportunity words. And so when I go back and look at Babymetal's success, when we take these 5 opportunities words, almost any sort of success, especially in economic development and placemaking, but also in entrepreneurship and innovation, we're able to find an answer to each of these 5 things to give you a reverse engineered assessment, business flow framework. So when we look at Babymetal through that, it's clear that their breakthrough was not accidental. So every principle of a competitive advantage that's sustainable is there. First thing we look at is preserve. What are you going to preserve? Well, they have never abandoned what made them unique. They preserve authentic Japanese kawaii culture and traditional metal musicianship, and they don't dilute it at all. So they stay true to that. Businesses think they have to choose, be authentic or be successful. Babymetal proves you can be both. The same way that a place like South Beach, when it was first revitalizing, proved that. Then what they do, they enhance their unique positioning. Enhance is our next word. World-class production values. I mean, the production is incredible. Professional choreography and international touring, and a huge infrastructure behind it. But the other thing is, when we talk about the production values and the choreography, what makes a place more than anything else are the aesthetics. What connects people to a place? The aesthetics, how it looks. That's the first thing on the list. It's what makes a place. Disney. Talk about tribes. Disney is a master at having created a tribe. Those production values, the aesthetics, that's critical. But the key is, along with all of that, they got better at being themselves. They weren't trying to be anybody else, and they still aren't, as you saw in that video. They just got better at what they do and who they are, and really stepped into their own to own it. They exposed this hidden demand. No one knew it was there. Maybe they didn't even know it. But when they came out, it exposed this demand. Like I said, we didn't know we needed this type of metal until it was there. No market research would have ever said this would work. Never. Just like before the South Beach revitalization, when it was God's waiting room in Wrinkle City, you could have never done a market analysis that said, turn all of these into hotels and change the zoning and line the street with sidewalk cafes. Never worked. Same thing here. Millions of people wanted Koba Metal and this fusion, but they didn't know they wanted it until Babymetal showed up. Importantly, I'm not a big fan of them anyway. This is why focus groups kill innovation. Focus groups are good when you're trying to serve a market that exists and you want to understand that market. But focus groups only tell you about the demand that already exists. They cannot tell you about innovation. So, it's a challenge for startups when you're trying to come up with your minimum viable product and bring it to market and have market proof, because you're trying to understand a market that you may be having to create. So again, there's an element and there's some contradiction here. And I think there's a couple of different camps. If you think about what Rick Rubin said, create for yourself. Well, you can create for yourself, and you may create something that you're the only one that wants. But you have to have a certain element of faith there, and just chart your own path and do it authentically. Don't create just to create for someone else. Invest. I mean, their investments. What was their differentiator? They identified that, and they invested in it. I mean, these professional musicians that are just incredible. The international promotion, the super high quality production values, even their live videos are unlike most live concert footage when you look at the production level. Constant brand development and a story behind it. They've got the story of the Fox God and the metal gods and all of these things that just reinforces that unique positioning, and doubles down on it instead of trying to broaden their appeal by becoming more generic. And then what do they capitalize on? Well, this is another place where businesses can fail. They capitalized on, they were the only kawaii metal band in that subgenre. They own their category instead of competing in other categories that were already oversaturated, where thousands of bands and tens of thousands of musicians get lost every year. So this framework shows why they succeeded where so many other musicians and concepts failed. So many other impossible ideas that failed, startups, entrepreneurs. Every single element built on the others. You can't just preserve your authenticity. You have to enhance it. You have to expose that hidden demand and invest in what makes you different. And then capitalize on your unfair advantage, your purple cow, that unique position that you have. So this is exactly the same framework that's going to work for a city, that's going to work for businesses, for any entity that's trying to sustain a competitive advantage by using authentic innovation and creating new markets. This is a framework for you to consider and learn from. Now we're going to talk about being fearless. You saw in that last clip on Give Me Chocolate. They are fearless. They don't apologize. This is who they are. They get up, they do their dances. Some people can criticize it. Some people don't like it. It's not for everybody. That's the great thing about art. But for those people who like it, they love it. And lots of people will tell you, baby metal is something you either love it or you hate it. Um, I love it. It's just it's so new and refreshing. It's actually kind of nice to have to be listening to this really brutal metal because I love the music and smile and be happy. Again, that's an element that we didn't know was missing until it showed up. But what the thing that goes beyond just the strategy is they were absolutely fearless. They continue to be fearless about being different, and they're unapologetic about it. We unveiled in our first episode the business flair "Do Not Apologize" playlist, which is you want to know what business flair sounds like, it's that playlist. We don't apologize for our approach, even if it is different. We don't apologize for our attitude, even if it is different, and the way that we do things, the way that we think, the way that we design. And it's that fearlessness connects to something fundamental. I've learned this as a musician. I've learned this in economic development. Um, you have to have a level of fearlessness that a lot of people aren't willing to embrace if you really want that breakthrough success. And so when I was writing Unleash Your Unfair Advantage, this is the phenomenon I was trying to write about. Every community, every business, every entrepreneur, you've got these authentic assets that can create competitive advantages that can't be replicated or are very difficult to replicate. But you have to dig to find them. I talked about this on another podcast recently. When we go into a city and say, what do you have to capitalize on? We get a lazy answer usually. Well, we have the beach. You and 200 other cities in Florida. Don't be lazy. Do the work and dig in and find those. And don't be afraid to embrace what makes you different, just because it might invite some criticism. What they also showed us that when you lean into that differentiation instead of apologizing it, they could have toned down some of their kawaii elements to appeal to more of the metal purists. They could have done that over time as they became more successful. They could have softened the music a little bit to even go broader with pop, but they didn't. They've gone heavier and partnered with heavier bands in some of their collaborations. They doubled down on exactly what they were doing. And the more they doubled down, the more of a global phenomenon they became. So this is something we see in economic development. Cities have just these awesome, incredible assets. They have cultural heritage that's unique. They have distinctive geographies, history that's just so fascinating. But maybe sometimes I don't know, are they embarrassed by what makes them different? We're constantly here. They want to be the next Austin. They want their own San Antonio Riverwalk. They want what Charleston did. They want to be the next South Beach, or they don't want to be the next South Beach. But they're always thinking about someone else. Everyone wanted to be the next Silicon Valley. And we still hear some of that. And they're always looking at someone else and wanting to be someone else. They want to be some other place rather than be themselves and who they are. Be the first and only and best version of yourself that nobody else can be and nobody else can replicate. And being fearless, this is not about being reckless, especially for you in the public sector, but it's about being confident and figure out your authentic value proposition and be confident in that. And you're, to do that successfully, you may have to polarize some rather than try and please everybody. If you want to try and please everybody, enjoy your race to the bottom. And what Babymetal proves is that being remarkable always beats being safe every time. I the other thing is kind of having that confidence. Who are your champions? Where's your leadership? What is that idea that everybody's going to embrace? How do you build that tribe in your community? And that leadership and that team and the fans and everybody just seeing it. And we've seen this happen in cities that we've worked in, where everybody does realize this is what we want to do. This is where we want to go. And so I'm going to show you one more clip that just shows this in an incredible way. This is one of their earlier songs, but it's a more recent video, and it's a song called Headbanger. And you're going to see this incredible leadership from Sue Metal, who's the lead singer. But then you're going to see the teamwork as she stands in that leadership position. And then Moa and Momo, the two backup singers and dancers, as they engage the crowd, especially Moa, you'll see as she is that connection that's out to the tribe and just visually communicating with them and how they just respond to, again, this concept that is baby metal, this thing. And so it's another of those fascinating elements, is just this leadership. But it's not, as I said, it's not just leadership. It's that it's being a leader of a movement, being the champion of a movement. And this is Babymetal headbang. Just watch the musicians when it cuts to the musicians here. You're going to see the crowd just responding incredibly to them. You'll see it's sort of like watching a Jimmy Buffett concert when they go into a fin. You see the tribe just come to life. It's almost this like a living organism. Again, the musician's part of it. And so just imagine if you could create this sort of energy and connection in your community for the direction and for implementing the vision that your community has. So again, I wanted to make sure that I hit that leadership point, because it's not a leadership point in terms of I'm the city manager, I'm the mayor, here's what we're going to do, I'm the entrepreneur. It's how do you build that tribe? How do you build that fan base? I don't have it today. Today I'm wearing a baby metal shirt, but usually we have our flare head shirts on in here. Again, the flare heads, parrot heads, dead heads. Now you get where we came up with that moniker for our tribe here at Business Flare. So what does this mean for those of us, whether we're working in city economic development and innovation and entrepreneurship? Stop trying to compete in existing categories if you don't fit into an existing category. Instead of fighting for scraps of someone else's market, is there your own category that you can create that someone else can't replicate? What is that unique combination of assets that nobody else has that can be authentically replicated? We kind of combine those 5 opportunity words. When we take capitalize and expose, combine those, that's how you find your purple cow or your unfair advantage. Embrace the criticisms. If your economic development strategy is not facing initial resistance, it's not differentiated enough to create a competitive advantage. Resistance signals you're onto something genuinely innovative. Think about what you're trying to do. You're trying to change the status quo when you're doing redevelopment or economic development. You're always going to get resistance when you try to change the status quo. Slumlords like the status quo. Freeloaders like the status quo. So that resistance is going to be normal. Embrace the criticism. And then you've got to commit to that long game. You've got to be in it. You've got to look at Babymetal, the predictable pattern that an entrepreneur is going to face, or even a redevelopment or an economic development plan. 1 to 3 years of this is never going to work. Let's change focus. Let's change tactics. Years 4 through 6 is, well, maybe there's something here. And then 7 and 10 is, of course, this works. And there's praise and glory and accolades for the non-participants. Most places are going to give up during the criticism phase, and they're not going to push through to that mastery. And a lot of entrepreneurs are going to do that, especially if they're trying to get funding and they're hitting walls there. They're not sticking to it. Number 4, do not apologize for your authenticity. Get better at who you are, not better at being someone else. Don't aspire to be someone else. There are appropriate ways to aspire and to look at other places, but don't try and be someone else. There's enough generic. What the world wants is authentic, especially now as we see changes in the economy, changes in how people connect and do things. And then finally, remember that creating places people want to be, this starts with authentic vision and compelling storytelling. The infrastructure, the incentives, those don't matter if you don't have those real stories that are true and meaningful about your place. Think about the Babymetal place, the Babymetalverse. Babymetal, what they did, Koba Metal, who created it, whose brainchild this was, he created this desire for that place in the music world. And there was no physical infrastructure at all. The economic development followed that emotional connection, just like with Jimmy Buffett. Create that emotional connection to Margaritaville, a fantasy land, a place that didn't exist. But after they created that emotional connection, it had those compelling, meaningful stories. Then they did the economic development and they created the real places. So we're going to wrap up. I think we went a little long on this one, but Babymetal's story, this is not about the music. It's the fundamental principles of authentic innovation, entrepreneurship. They apply whether you're creating kawaii metal or authentic economic development or a startup. It proves that path from impossible idea or is just a gimmick and a fad to global phenomenon, that it requires preserving your authentic identity, enhancement of your core strengths, and finding and exposing that hidden demand that's out there, investing in your differentiators and capitalizing on your unique market position. Importantly, they show us you do not have to apologize for being authentically different. And that you can weather the criticism, and in the end of the day, it's going to be your greatest competitive advantage. So until our next episode, keep looking for the music in your city's story and keep looking for those economic development lessons hidden in music, wherever and however you experience it. Remember, again, if your economic development efforts aren't facing resistance, you're not doing enough to matter. So visit musiccities.com for more insights on how music drives authentic economic development. If you want to understand what fearless economic development sounds like, check out our Business Flair Do Not Apologize soundtrack. This is the Music Cities podcast. I'm Kevin Crowder. So stay fearless, stay authentic, never apologize for being remarkable. Peace out.